Welcome to Women of the World, a show which gives a voice to women from around the world who have chosen to make the United States their home. Our show believes in the principles written on and enshrined by the Statue of Liberty. Here's today's moderator, Ann McKenna.
Hello viewers, and welcome to today's episode of the show. Moderating today, Ann McKenna. I have the pleasure to introduce to you an amazing guest to the show, but first, I would like to have the privilege to invite to you our co-hosts, starting with Nadia Jordana. Hi, Nadia.
Hi, Ann. I'm really happy to be on this show today. This is going to be a great episode.
It is gonna be great, and it is so good to see you today.
You too.
Welcome. And next, I would like to introduce Beverly Crosby. Hi, Bev.
Hi, Ann. It's so nice to be here, and Nadia, I'm excited about this show too. It's going to be a lot of good information for our viewers.
Exactly. Well, welcome to the show. Now, I have the honor to introduce to you Dawn Tomlinson. She's our guest to the show today. Dawn was adopted from Korea, and she's going to be sharing with us extremely important information on adoptions and just really educating us. She's also going to be sharing with us some of the things that she's involved in. She is the president of Adoptees and has been for the last 3 years. She's been involved in that same organization since 2012 and does a lot of other community things. So welcome, Dawn. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very much looking forward to today.
Thank you. So would you please start sharing with us how old you were when you came to United States and share with us what that was like?
Yes, I came to the United States when I was 2 years old. So I had been with my birth mother until that time. I'm a mixed race Korean adoptee. And Korea is the most homogeneously ethnic country in the world until just very recently. There wasn't a lot of tolerance for mixed race children. They were treated pretty badly. When people found out that American soldiers and UN soldiers were having mixed race children with Korean women, they decided to come and help. So they started trying to get the children out through adoption. Well, as this continued, it was just to get the children out and help them have a better life so that they wouldn't be shunned in Korea.
So it had a very well-meaning beginning how that
Right.
all started.
But as time went on, the legal problems that were presented by bringing children to America from Korea were overcome by going through Congress and kind of cobbling together laws to make that happen. And eventually it streamlined the process. At that point, because it was just so much easier to adopt from Korea, children were coming that were actually not mixed race children, they were Korean children.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how the big, huge wave of the 70s and 80s of just thousands and thousands of children a year coming out of Korea and to, well, Europe and America mostly.
What was that number? It was a huge number, but what was it? Between what and what?
Well, it's very hard to say because a lot of these orphanages were small. They were not required to report to the government. So some of them would close or burn down or move or merge. The records were perhaps kept or moved on, but sometimes they were burned or just even thrown out.
Okay.
Our best estimate is somewhere between 200 and 300,000 children left Korea as international adoptees. And
Yeah, that's a
such
big number.
That's to date, or that's a current number, right? Okay. What did the mixed Korean children, you said that they weren't treated very well. What type of treatment were they getting or receiving?
Well, for starters, they were called names. They were referred to as dust in the streets or devil child, given a lot of names. And some of the Korean adoptees who stayed longer than I did remember being called these names and treated terribly once they left their home. In Korea, you have a family registry, and think of it kind of as a combination genealogy and birth certificate. Well, mixed-race children weren't put on the family registry because they didn't have a father present to help make that happen, and the mother's family would be too ashamed of these children. Well, you could possibly be turned down for school, medical help, definitely a job or marriage. So life in Korea for these people was extremely difficult.
Now, was that equally the same for men, for the boys and the girls, or did that especially affect one gender?
I think it pretty much affected both genders, but it was sometimes assumed that if the girls were mixed race, they would become prostitutes. That was the only thing they could do.
And you mentioned that it started with adopting the mixed Korean, but then the Korean children were starting to be adopted as well. How did that all come about?
Well, it was very slow. So at first, these children were just orphans because their parents had died in the war. Sometimes they didn't even know if they were mixed-race children or not because they were so young. They couldn't tell. And as we all know, genetics can be an odd thing, so some children look more Korean than others. So they took these children and just started giving them better homes, sending them away from Korea. Eventually, though, a family member might bring a child that was unwanted. So for instance, in many cases, a grandmother would tell the mother she was taking care of the baby while the mother worked, and then she would bring the baby to the orphanage, and the birth mother wouldn't even realize that the child had been put up for adoption and sent out of the country. In other cases, the mothers would show up at the orphanage they thought they were giving them medical care. They didn't realize what adoption actually meant, only to come back later to pick up their child and find out they were gone.
So the parents, in many cases, didn't even have a choice or weren't even aware of what was happening.
Correct.
There are some heartbreaking stories then throughout that early history of Korean adoption.
Yes, and it still goes on. I know people who are quite young who were left at police stations, so no one knows their story. They may never find out. There's no identifying information, and there's no way to know who actually put them there.
So is that changing, or has it remained pretty much the same over years?
It's actually staying the same because the new laws in Korea state that you must register a child on the family registry. There is no choice. To get out of that, because it's still shameful to have an illegitimate child, that's why children are now still being left at the police station.
Is this part of the purpose of AdoptSource, the organization of which you're president? Is that part of what that's working towards to change those things, or maybe you can clarify for me?
Well, there's always people working on that, and as an organization, we can support their efforts. So for instance, there's an organization called KUMFA, K-U-M-F-A, in Korea. They're supporting single mothers. Single mothers in Korea are not accepted very well. Kind of think maybe the 50s in America. So they're trying to make it more socially acceptable, and they're trying to give them resources, funding, social activities, things that would support them emotionally and financially to make single parenthood possible. So organizations like AdoptSource support their efforts through money, awareness, spreading the word, things like that. We have a film festival, and I know for a lot of families that come in, those film festivals are just such an interesting, immediate way to show people an entire story in an hour.
Do you make the films in the film festival? What kind of films are in this film festival?
We've had many films. We have made one documentary, Candid Conversations on Adoption. We're very proud of that. The reason we did that documentary is because there are, first of all, so many international adoptees in Minnesota. And we had screened so many films from everywhere else, from Korea, all over America, even Europe. We have stories from birth mothers and adoptive mothers and adoptees themselves. But we didn't really have a Minnesota-specific film, and so we made our own, and we felt that the Minnesota voice of Korean adoptees and other international adoptees was extremely important. We're actually planning our next one now, as well as our next film festival. So please keep updated on Facebook. We would love to make that announcement there, and if you keep your eye there, you'll be informed.
And AdoptSource does have a Facebook page, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And it's spelled ADOPSOURCE.
Correct.
Yeah.
And you also do write articles.
I do. We have a very good collaboration with Korean Quarterly. Korean Quarterly is a quarterly newsletter.
Okay.
It's done by adoptive parents. They have 2 Korean adopted children, and they found that there wasn't anything really in Minnesota that addressed the Korean community. So over 25 years ago, they started the newsletter, and they've been doing it ever since. Lots of information, both local and global.
Where can people get that newspaper?
You know, you can find it all around town. In fact, I personally just delivered it to the Burnsville Library. So a lot of libraries, Korean restaurants, definitely places that you would find other publications. You can look for the Korean Quarterly.
Do you participate in the distribution of it? Or did it just work out that way too?
Well, I also belong to Shinparam, the drum group that they sponsor. So when we're doing practices, Steve will often say, who can help us distribute? And we all take a pack and deliver it somewhere near our house.
And there's an article about you in there right now, isn't there?
There is. My daughter is spending the year in Paris teaching English at a high school. So I had a free place to stay, and I went for about a month, but I just knew that I wanted to see Koreans there too, and I knew there was a Korean adoptee group there, and I found them, and I went to one of their events.
That's great.
Sounds like you have a wonderful support group, or you and the others have created a wonderful support group. Awareness, providing awareness, just almost like that second family here in Minnesota.
There are more Korean adoptees per capita in Minnesota than anywhere in the world. So the concentration of them here is kind of incredible.
How did that happen?
We're not sure. I mean, there have been studies done about it. I've even had someone who was studying geography come and study why that happens in Minnesota. And I'm not sure there's any one factor. I honestly think there are several factors that contribute to that. And I want to talk for a minute about the Kawa women. They're a Korean American Women's Association. They are global. They are Korean women who have married non-Korean men. And there's a chapter in Minnesota. And the reason that we love collaborating with such groups is that we have things that bond us. And this particular group is like having a mother to me. It's the Korean mother I never had. And for them, they have mixed race children because they've married American men. Now, just like my mother was shunned for having a mixed race children, that still exists. And they don't feel very welcome in their community, so they formed their own group. And this way, and this is the best part, they can eat Korean food together because mostly their husbands don't necessarily want it every single day.
Every day, sure.
So when I go to events, there's a lot of Korean language, and I don't speak Korean, but it's really fun to hear my birth language even if I don't speak it. There's a lot of Korean food, and for me, connecting to my culture through food has just been a fabulous experience. I must remember that food somewhere in my heart because it always warms me to go there and just eat Korean food with Korean women and hear the language.
Sounds like a wonderful organization. Yeah. Let me ask you this. Do you know of anyone or those who have tried to reconnect to their families back in Korea?
Yes.
What happens?
Well, several things can happen. One, you go through your agency and the agency can stop you for whatever reason. Now in America, it's pretty straightforward, but it's not so straightforward in Korea. You can go one time and look at your file and see one set of papers, and you can visit the next year and see different papers. It's up to the discretion of the social worker that you're meeting with to decide what you actually see. And at the same time, how they connect you with your birth family, it's the same thing. We have people who say, I know my birth mother was looking for me for years. I don't know why the agency didn't connect us. There are other people who say that the minute their mother walked in the agency, they were connected. The other thing that can happen is that you find your birth family and they don't want to talk to you. And that feels like a big second rejection for a lot of people, as you can imagine, putting yourself out there emotionally, and then once more being told, no, we don't want to see you.
So, continuing with that, would you please share with us some of the struggles that adopted children go through, especially when you are adopted to parents that don't look like you, and or any adoption in general? And are there things you think that would help?
I hope so. Well, I think everybody has things about who they are and what their identity is that they struggle with. And if you think of it that way, an adoption just adds another layer to that challenge. And being internationally adopted and not looking like your family adds to that even more. So it becomes very complex. I think from what I've seen and observed from looking at families and other adoptees, the biggest thing that families can acknowledge is that their children are different. So many families try to minimize that. I think it doesn't help. I think it helps to acknowledge and recognize that, yes, my daughter is Korean and I'm not Korean. Going from there, helping your child connect to their culture, whether it's food or clothing, language classes, culture classes. I know that everyone I've talked to has either said, I'm so grateful that my parents did that, or they say, I wish my parents had done it more. Even if they didn't want to do it at the time, and that happens so much. You know, when they're teenagers, they resist it, but in the end, they wish their parents had just kind of, you know, convinced them that they should do it, because in the end, they either missed it if they didn't have it, or they were happy they had it later.
So I have another question along that. Does it help more to introduce the adopted child as my adopted daughter, my adopted son, or just this is my son? Do you have any inkling on what would be better for the child?
Yeah, generally speaking, I have not heard an adoptee yet who likes to be referred to as the adopted child, especially when there are biological children in the family. It separates that child, and even if there aren't biological children in the family, it separates them from their cousins or other family members. So you, for instance, wouldn't say, here's my adopted aunt.
Oh, sure.
You would say, here's my aunt.
Yeah.
And it's we like to just belong and be like everyone else, and despite the fact that we understand that we look different, we still would like to be accepted as everybody else. And when you do that, it indicates that maybe that isn't there.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that you don't know the truth, but it's the constant, this is my adopted child, that I personally feel would be damaging, but just wanted to confirm it with you is that aspect of it. So
that brings up, along the same subject, you mentioned in a correspondence something, and you said humorous assumptions, or shall we say interesting assumptions that people make. What are some of those?
The one that hits most of us at some point or another is, where are you from? So if we don't want to really talk about it because we don't know that person, we'll generally say, well, I'm from Minnesota. And truthfully, very few children were brought over as teenagers, so most of us were brought over as young children or babies. So this is all we know. We know what it's like to grow up in Minnesota. And then people say, well, where are you from really? And you know, when we've given someone a hint that we've already answered the question and they pursue it, it feels very invasive, but it also feels very much like they're pointing out that we don't belong, our differences. It's very prying, and it's generally not accepting the fact that we live in America where immigrants have come for centuries to form a country together, and we're just part of that immigration process.
Tell us about that immigration process. When children come, they're adopted, and what are some of the issues that arise with the immigration or
Right. Many adoptees call themselves immigrants because we are from a different country, and we call ourselves the immigrants that didn't come on our own. You know, we didn't do this ourselves. We were brought here by somebody else, but we're still immigrants. And in the beginning of adoption, when a child came, you were required to get naturalization papers for that child. And nobody did any oversight for that. So many children were not actually naturalized. I'm very fortunate. My parents naturalized me. I'm very grateful. We estimate 16 to 20,000 Korean adoptees were not naturalized. Well, as soon as the government realized this was a problem, in 2000, the Adoptee Citizenship Act was passed. And this said that as of 2000, anyone landing on Korean or on American soil as an international adoptee would be an American citizen, but you still need to get your certificate of citizenship, which is much easier than naturalization. So I think even those parents weren't told this, and now in 2018, those children are becoming adults. So now there's a gap. The gap is that it places adoptees at risk for being illegal aliens. And as an illegal alien, you have no citizen rights and you can possibly be deported. I know Korean adoptees who've been deported. It's very hard for these adoptees to go to their birth country. They don't speak the language. We talked earlier about how important family connections are. They don't have those. They can't get a job. Some of them have even committed suicide, and those are our most tragic cases, actually.
Sounds horrible. That's a horrible situation for anyone to be in. If there was somebody in our viewing audience that had come over and doesn't have their naturalization or citizenship, and this is like the first time they've heard about it, what could they do at this point? How long would it take them to become a citizen or get the correct documentation?
I don't know currently what under this administration. I think it's become a little bit more complex. I do have a woman that I know on Facebook. A few years ago, her husband died. She lived here all her life. She was a Korean adoptee. Her husband was a veteran. He said, "Don't worry, honey," because he had cancer. "When I die, you'll get my veterans benefits." So she had voted, she had served on juries, she had paid taxes all her life. When she went to claim those vets benefits is when they actually told her, "You're not a citizen, so you can't collect, and now we're going to deport you." She lost her home, she lost her savings, spending money, fighting the battle to not be deported. And one of the things they claimed made her eligible for deportation is the fact that she voted and served on a jury, which you can't do if you're not a citizen. But she didn't know. It took over a year for that, so I don't know currently how long it would take. I do know, again, people have been deported regularly, and I will also point out, I know a vet who's in danger of being deported. So he actually served in the military, and he's still in danger of being deported.
Who would you say someone should contact I mean, even just to get the ball rolling, you know, even the first
Right.
step, do you know where they should start?
You should go to your nearest immigration lawyer and just find out where you stand legally. They're
So
your
an
best option.
immigration lawyer?
Yes, definitely. I also know an adoptee who is fairly certain that she does not have naturalization papers. She's trying to stay under the radar. She thinks if she doesn't do anything that would flag it, for instance, get a passport, claim any benefits, that she will remain under the radar and she will be safe, at least for the time being.
It's scary,
that is
though.
very shocking and very sad, because I think for regular Americans don't understand what it's like to be the immigrant under such circumstances, especially when you've lived here all your life and you don't know any different, and to be standing in that position. Well, we are running out of time, but where can we find information about you? Or about AdoptSource, about you, about, is there somewhere that you would point people that they would find information?
You can go on Facebook. We have a Facebook page that is probably the most current and up to the minute information that you can get. We also have a second page, the Minnesota Transracial Film Festival page on Facebook, and you can find us there. I'm there too. Just send me a
Well,
message.
That's
That'd be great.
great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing with us a lot of very useful information along the lines of adoptions and what you are doing. And for Nadia and Beverly, thank you very much for co-hosting with me. And for our viewers, thank you for tuning in, and see you next time at Women of the World Show.